Yeah.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the BR College Football Show. I'm Mike Golic Jr., former Notre Dame offensive lineman, current TNT sports broadcaster. Excited to be with you as we are every Monday right around 5 p.m. Eastern to break down everything we saw in the world of college football. As always, you can check us out on the BR app, on the BR YouTube channel. Hit us up in the comments, the chat. We always appreciate your contributions to the show, except for you that make fun of my bald head. You guys can go kick rocks. But for everyone else, hit us up. We'll answer your questions as we go along here and digest what was on paper going into this season. One of the weekends that we had circled, week 5 of the college football calendar, was a banger, a powerhouse, and it lived up to it in every sense of the word. All the ranked matchups that we had inside the top 25, one-possession games, some of which went into overtime, and gave us a vastly different looking AP poll going into this week. So why don't we start there with our AP poll reactions for this week. Some movement up top. As we know, Ohio State still holding it down in that number 1 spot. Some questions that'll get answered as we go forward, I think, about the Buckeyes, whose only major win right now. Oh, I should say Washington this weekend was a quality win, and I think that was one. I know Washington had been getting a lot more respect in the last couple of weeks, but since that week 1 win against Texas, where, hey, we're still not quite sure about the Arch Manning experience there, they sit at number 1. Oregon, understandably, moves up to 2 after getting a win on the road in Happy Valley against a Penn State team that was most everyone's favorite to come back and win the Big Ten, be a potential college football playoff contender and champion. Oregon went out there, more conservative game plan than I expected. We'll get to that in a little bit, but Dante Moore and company win big, move up to the number 2 spot. Miami holding pat at number 3. Ole Miss at number 4, flip-flopping essentially with LSU after their big win this weekend here. And LSU drops all the way down to number 13, one of the biggest fallers, just behind number 12, Georgia, who falls after their loss to Alabama. Back up inside the top 10 now are the Crimson Tide. For LSU and Brian Kelly's bunch, I know Brian Kelly came out after the game and, it gave your usual, I think, boilerplate coach answer of, Garrett Nussmeier has to play better. Every player on the offense has to play better. I think some people might have clipped that and thought he was just singling out Garrett. His whole point was, hey, he was asked about Garrett Nussmeier's play and pointed out that there's a million places this offense lost. I mean, in my mind, still for LSU, one, Brian Kelly came out before the season or a while back and kind of gave up the goose that Garrett Nussmeier had gone into this season dealing with an injury to his torso. And now Garrett Nussmeier and Brian Kelly are both kind of mums. Garrett said he's not going to be talking about his health. Brian Kelly basically said that he's healthy, which he's healthy enough to be out there, so people are only going to care so much. But I do think that's a big part of it. There have been parts of his game, particularly the deep passing, that just don't look right. But overall, this is an offense that's still incredibly one-dimensional in a way that is going to make it even tougher to come by wins if you're dealing with a quarterback who's maybe less than 100%, we can say certainly. But you look back at this weekend, LSU 59 yards rushing in this game. Like, going back to the start of last season when Brian Kelly and this LSU team came in and said, we need to go and run the football more, they've talked about it and haven't been about it. And this year was always going to be an uphill battle in that, losing 4 NFL starters on the O-line. But that reared its ugly head again. And on the other side, we'll get into later Ole Miss and whether or not they're for real or not. But that, to me, certainly becomes a major topic of conversation in Baton Rouge in the year where it finally seems like you have the defense, even though Trinidad Chambliss and that Ole Miss offense, they're going to be able to move the ball against most anybody. That group's been largely looked at as the strength this year. And on the other side, offensively, anything but. Bama should be higher, but I'm not mad at 10, says Rich Slay. That's a tough one, especially in light of what we saw with Florida State getting bounced by Virginia to start off this weekend. I think going into that matchup with Georgia, a lot of people were wondering, hey, what does that look like if all of a sudden that win, or that loss, I should say, for Alabama looks worse in the rearview mirror? Florida State dropping to 18, which I saw some people take umbrage with too. Listen, right, wrong, or indifferent, Florida State is going to have to be at the benefit of proving the people that doubted them wrong. And again, quite honestly, these preseason top 25 polls, even early now, preseason, early season top 25 polls, extremely volatile, and Florida State a great example of that with the ride they've had so far. I'll be interested to see how they respond and if we start to see maybe more respect for Virginia as this year goes along. Undefeated to start the season, offensively looking pretty strong. So I'm with you, Wayner. No team that looks that much better than everyone else is the story of college football season right now. And it's why just staying within shouting distance, cough, cough, Notre Dame, is going to be vital for the rest of this season. We're getting into conference play. The Big Ten and the SEC are going to largely take shape through that, and it's going to be who comes out on the other side of it. But again, the biggest movers in this one, LSU down at 13, I think doesn't leave them out of it by any means, but they've had problems that have existed there for a few weeks that just got exposed in a big way on this stage against Ole Miss. Let's take a look at some of the big games of this weekend now. Penn State fans have been heavy in the chat right now. JR93 says a Penn State fan in the chat here. I've seen plenty of the comments about James Franklin and what we need to do here. Penn State loses another big-time game, this time to Oregon on the road. Penn State should keep Franklin. That seems to be the conversation. And I'll say this. We know the big game stats about James Franklin, and I was talking with someone earlier today that said ultimately this is still a player thing. We can have the Drew Aller conversation about where he should be. But Penn State, 2-21 against AP top 6 opponents. James Franklin's been there a long time. Players have come and gone. He has stayed the exact same. And so at some point, it's a failure of preparation for these big moments that has been with him at the helm. Drew Aller, as a part of this, is an interesting conversation. I was never sold on Drew Aller as the potential number one pick. Talent-wise, he's certainly there. The arm talent's there. And you saw that during some of this game, right? The Devontae Ross touchdown to start the fourth quarter, awesome rip on that corner ball in the end zone. He's got the ability to do that consistently. And quite honestly, a big part of this game was Drew Aller just didn't have a lot of time to set his feet and make throws. This offensive line, I thought, coming into the season was expected to be one of the best in college football, and I thought they got pushed around by Oregon a bunch in this game. You see, for Drew Aller here, the stats aren't gaudy, but the thing that bothered me the most in this game, quite honestly, from the Drew Aller perspective, was at times how flustered he looked. There seemed to be a loss of composure at certain points, which looked more like a road game response than a response at home where you should be comfortable with a crowd on your side and everything that's gone into that. So Drew Aller, again, we keep waiting for the talent to show up in big games in a meaningful way. And when you are a player that's this gifted, even if the offensive line's not perfect, the expectation is kind of that you're able to smooth out some of those edges. I appreciated his toughness late in the game, putting his body on the line to try and make it happen in the run game. Derek Jackson says PSU's offensive coordinator needs to bounce too. With Andy Kotelnicki, at times I have wondered if maybe some of the things that you had to do with the talent level you were working with at a place like Kansas or like where he's been prior, you do here when you've got at times a more talented team. Maybe you need to go by the wayside in favor of simplifying the equation, but either way, this is still a team that, until further notice, we are who we thought they were, right? Like Penn State is still a team that's struggling to get over the big humps in those big moments. And that's no disrespect, right? This Oregon team is a really, really good squad. This Oregon team has the best quarterback, at least in terms of talent, that Dan Lanning has had in his time at Oregon. I mean, people talking about Penn State being conservative. I was surprised that Oregon was as conservative as they were on the other side of that, even with going out and mounting a lead where in theory you could salt that away. Tons of talent in that backfield for Oregon. And again, Dante Moore can put the ball wherever he wants all over the field. I think that is a special player that James Franklin, on the other side, Dan Lanning and Will Stein, their offensive coordinator, have the ability to go and really mold into something special there. So he is now the Heisman Trophy favorite, oh, by the way. And I think is going to have a real chance to put his hands around that trophy before it's all said and done if their season continues to go this way. Richard, I hear you. Drew Aller just in the wrong system. Maybe I've heard that from other people. I talked to Jake Butt, who does a great job over at the Big Ten Network about that. But again, like to me, like people that want the pro style stuff, There's plenty of under center run and play action built into this offense. Like, I don't know. I have not looked at it and thought, oh, this is a square peg and round hole situation as much as it is. Well, one, all the portal receivers, I didn't see a ton of open guys this weekend either for Penn State. So that's always an interesting conversation in an area that people thought was going to get a lot better. But Penn State, I picked to win the Big Ten coming into the season. I think I had them to win the national championship, and I've got to downgrade those expectations yet again because we see there is a lid specifically on this offense when it comes to these moments. Same can't be said apparently for Alabama, at least as long as they're playing Georgia. Kirby Smart, officially an Alabama problem. There had always kind of been one, but we had thought maybe that was a Nick Saban deal. That one, I think what we saw from Alabama was in the week since that Florida State loss for Ryan Grubb, who returned as the offensive coordinator alongside Kalen DeBoer. The two had been together for years, going back to certainly time in Washington. But before that, these are guys that knew each other well. Both seemed to just be better with the other around. Ryan Grubb didn't have a great time in Seattle last year coordinating the Seahawks offense. And they seemed a lot more comfortable going out there. Ty Simpson has looked better and better as the weeks have gone along. So I think that offense has made a ton of great strides. And for Georgia offensively, I think some of the same questions outside of what we saw maybe at times in that Tennessee game sort of persist there. This is just one that after a while, I think becomes mental in a weird way too. Like having been on the other side of some bad losses to teams over the years, like, you just got to believe that you can get over the hump in those moments against teams wearing that jersey and with that script A on the side of it. And for whatever reason, Georgia is still absolutely a contender to win the SEC. This, to me, was more about Alabama and Kalen DeBoer at this juncture really needing a statement win, and that sense of urgency clearly showing up in how they did it. Ty Simpson's put himself in that Heisman conversation. I think the Heisman is – I know at times, like talking too much about the CFP, talking too much about the Heisman can be white noise for some people, especially early in the season. But I do think the Heisman's really interesting early at this point in the year. Like Ty Simpson, Dante Moore, Jeremiah Smith obviously should be in that conversation perennially as one of the best players in college football, even though he's not a quarterback. Fernando Mendoza at Indiana is one of the near favorites right now, and deservedly so. Do I think Bama can run the table? Becomes an interesting question. Let's pull up the old schedule for Alabama here and just take a look. Well, it's about to get really weird again. So the Vanderbilt rematch from last year could make things really interesting. Missouri, Tennessee, South Carolina. Do I think Alabama can run the table against this schedule remaining? Probably not. That's just a testament to the SEC. Like, I don't think there's going to be a lot of people running the table in this year's version where there's no big bad, but also there's a lot of really good teams. Like the Joey Aguilar-led Tennessee Vols, good quality team. Missouri, Bo Prabula, Tennessee or Penn State fans, cover your ears, has looked really good throughout early portions of this season. So, no, I don't think they're going to run the table, but I think Alabama kind of reasserted themselves into that true contender status. A lot of people thought they had the talent there to win this year, and I think they still do. Running game needs to get off the ground consistently, but I do think they've got what it takes here. Speaking of that, let's get to the Ole Miss conversation now. Ole Miss beats LSU, big win. Trinidad Chambliss at the helm for the last few weeks and has looked sensational for this team. Is Ole Miss a legit contender? I would say yes, and I mean that's been the story of the last few years under Lane Kiffin. This offense is always going to be incredibly quarterback solvent. They've got, and again, I hear you in the chat, Severone. They're going to have a tough schedule coming up here. That is every week for everyone in the SEC. But with Ole Miss, the difference in the last few years is you feel like they can handle it right now. At LSU, the first real marquee win they're going to be able to point to, the stretch that's going to come up later in the season, at Georgia, at Oklahoma, which should be really interesting depending on what John Mateer's status at that point, what hangs in the balance. I've enjoyed all the edits of John Mateer's doctor who did that hand surgery. But outside of that, the schedule does line up pretty well. The road game at Georgia is the one that looms the largest at this point, though. All the rest of these, infinitely winnable games for them. Mississippi State, live dog and a tough out at the end of the season in the Egg Bowl. I get that. South Carolina is always kind of up and down and dependent on what you're going to see. But yes, I think Ole Miss absolutely live dog in this race, considering the way the schedule shakes out for them and considering, once again, the way that Lane Kiffin's been able to max out the quarterback play for that team. Really impressive win. Again, some of this I do think is a little bit of LSU being an incomplete and imperfect model on offense right now, but that is Oswald, Ole Miss 100% losing to Mississippi State would be the most that rivalry thing humanly possible. So interesting games in the big games that we saw this week. And again, we also had USC going down to Illinois in a ranked matchup, which we can get to right now in overreaction or not. So we'll take a look and tell you some of the takes from this weekend and what is an overreaction and what wasn't here. And let's start with that one. Illinois was a back-breaking loss for Lincoln Riley and the Trojans. Overreaction or not? It certainly seems like it for that fan base. I won't say that. I'll say that's not an overreaction. USC fans assimilating to the Big Ten have always faced questions about that team's toughness in the middle. I know they can move the ball on almost anybody offensively. And Hot Mike User said Lincoln Riley hasn't been the same since Oklahoma. I think one of the things that I heard early in the season about USC was how different it was in the trenches this year. And listen, I know that there were some changes already, right? They were down 2 starting offensive linemen into this game. Lost Kamari Ramsey on defense to food poisoning just before the game. We're missing a red zone target. Like, there were plenty of things built in. You already had Lincoln Riley before the game talking about the start times and all that stuff. Like, listen, if you didn't want some of the problems that came with taking the check in the Big Ten, you guys shouldn't have taken it. I know that's not a total Lincoln Riley decision, but it is what it is at this point. But I still, every time I turn on the tape with USC this season, and even defensively with D'Ant Lynn, I get they came into this game leading the country in sacks or damn near close. But you look at the competition they had played against right now, and that was fertile ground for that to maybe be a bit inflated. And you got up against the Illinois team where the offensive line, I think, is above average, but not great. And we saw that kind of exposed in the loss to Indiana a week before. I just think that since Bill Bedenbaugh stayed behind at Oklahoma, the offensive lines for Lincoln Riley and USC have not looked anywhere near that standard. There aren't a lot of O-line coaches in college football that coach to the standard that Bill did, but I think that quietly hollowed out some of the core of Lincoln's groups that, yes, they were led by the quarterbacks and moved the ball everywhere, but those offensive lines for years at Oklahoma were really, really good groups. The other side of the football, D'Ant Lynn came over with a lot of fanfare, and again, they've managed to go out here early in the season and harass the quarterbacks, but that level of competition jumped up. And you faced a veteran quarterback and a veteran offensive line, and all of a sudden you start, playing a little bit worried at the end of the game and asking questions about game management for Lincoln Riley, which we know is something that's reared its ugly head. But I still just think that this is a team that hasn't fully solved their problems along the lines of scrimmage in a way that just might not be the case under Lincoln Riley. They're still a live dog. Like, as a Notre Dame alum, I'm still very worried about that trip to South Bend. But I do think that seemed like a breaking point for some of this fan base for Lincoln Riley. Let's move along here. Arizona State will go on another run and get themselves back into college football playoff contention. Overreaction or underreaction? I'm going to say overreaction just for right now because I need to see it the next 2 weeks. Like, to go on the kind of run they did. Arizona State, from the second half against Mississippi State on, has looked like a team capable of going and doing some special things. That win against TCU on Friday night was awesome. And you saw all the best of that team offensively and defensively. But the next 2 weeks, they have Utah and Texas Tech. And those, to me right now, in terms of the quality on the field, have looked like the 2 best teams in the Big 12 through this early portion of the season. I don't think Arizona State has seen anything like what Texas Tech is about to throw at them on defense. And I just want to see how it reacts, because Sam Leavitt's a really good quarterback. Jordan Tyson looks like the best draft-eligible receiver right now. Jeremiah Smith, I still think the best receiver in college football. But Jordan Tyson looks like the best draft-eligible wide receiver right now. But Sam Leavitt, there's a lot of hero ball to his game. And I worry about that desire to go rogue consistently going up against a defense as talented as the one as certainly Texas Tech is going to throw at them. But even Utah, like, that final score against Texas Tech was kind of a misnomer, and that was a pretty closely contested game on both sides of the ball defensively. So I will say overreaction there. Arizona State is in that group of teams, I think, in the middle of the Big 12. that are able to go around, that are able to stick around. Like I called the Kansas and Cincinnati game this weekend that I thought were two teams kind of in that same area of the Big 12. Cincinnati gets the win and will get a big bump because of that. I think Arizona State's right in that mix, but right now I'd still have Texas Tech and Utah on a cliff of their own at the top of the Big 12. The Virginia field storming was the craziest one in years. No, not an overreaction at all. I've never seen one happen that quickly, ever. And part of that's the setup, right? Virginia's got the lawn right there in the corner of the end zone. This is also a game that was in overtime, and so everyone was kind of frothing at the mouth. But usually game day security does a better job of kind of keeping that at bay until you can get the opposing players clear. This might just be a me getting older thing. I was really legitimately scared when I first saw this. Squirrel White, I believe, was the receiver for Florida State that was in the corner of the end zone when that happened. Genuinely was worried for his safety. I didn't feel comfortable talking about this moment until I saw pictures showing that he was fine, but it looked like he could have very easily been trampled right there. That was a crowd that was completely untamed going out onto the field to celebrate an awesome moment. I don't want to take away from this. Virginia and what they've done to start this season has been awesome. They still have a lot of great things out in front of them. What a great moment for the program on the Friday night against a team like Florida State that had started off the season so well. But, man, between that and some of the ugliness you saw where the guy's walking out giving the finger to Thomas Castellanos, folks got to know how to act right a little bit more than that. I love field stormings. I've been a part of them as a player. I've been a part of them as a fan. It's awesome. It's a great moment to bond with team and fan base and celebrate an awesome moment. It's a great scene. It's a great visual. And that was truly one of the wildest ones that I had seen in years, but that was still one where I feel like at times we got close to crossing the line in a way that I wasn't comfortable with. So just, again, game day security, everyone involved. Make sure the players get out of there safe. Make sure no one's put in harm's way. The last thing we want to see is something awful. And that's what I worry about with things like the guy giving the middle finger to Castellanos is you go down there and mess with the wrong one of a player that just finished a heated game, and all of a sudden we could be looking at a situation a lot worse than this if someone tries to take matters into their own hands. Indiana is not the cute story they were last year. Overreaction or underreaction. I want to be clear. I didn't think Indiana was some cute story last year either. You looked at the underlying parts of that football team, and to me, former offensive lineman, I'm always going to look here, but I think it's a pretty generally accepted tenet of college football at this point, in football in general. Everything starts along the line of scrimmage. And Indiana was a good offensive and defensive line team last year, and they seem like they're even better this year. The beef they've got on both sides of the ball, paving the way for Fernando Mendoza, who's looked sensational so far coming over from Cal. No, this is absolutely not. I said them and Vanderbilt, it's not cute anymore. They're just good football teams. They're just well-coached programs. Now, for Vanderbilt, eventually the question's going to be, what does it look like post-Diego Pavia if he ever loses out on an NCAA eligibility suit, or if he can just stay in college and Van Wilder this thing forever? He's been the special program-changing player for quarterback at them, and I still need to see them do it without it. What Curt Cignetti is proving this year is what they do offensively is going to be one of those QB solvent programs. They're going to give guys the opportunity to come in and spray the ball over the field. They have had good wide receiver talent there. It's a heavy RPO-based scheme that's going to be built off that run game that Fernando Mendoza is a part of. You go back to the Illinois game, and I thought a big key to that game was they got him involved in the run game early in a way Illinois' defense had to account for and struggled to account for, managing the rest of that run game as they went along. So, yeah, there's nothing cute about the situation with Indiana. That's a good football team that, quite honestly, as they get into the meat of their Big Ten schedule, and they have a bye, Oregon has a bye, and then both of those teams will meet the following week. Fascinating game for me because Dan Lanning and company, what they've done so well is build the trenches up there in Oregon, building off of what Mario Cristobal had. And I think that's been the same story for Curt Cignetti at IU. So fascinated. That'll be probably the most interested game in a game I am next weekend, just in terms of seeing good on good for a team in Indiana that I feel like for a lot of people nationally still feels like they got to prove something. But no, not an overreaction. Indiana, not cute, actual legitimately good football team. All right, let's take a look at some tiers now. Undefeated teams that could be on fraud watch. Spoiler alert, I don't see many frauds in this group, quite honestly, as we look at some of the undefeated teams here. I'll tell you, definitively not fraud. We're looking at this point in this year in college football. of teams that we know and believe are good. I think Oregon, Miami, Indiana, Texas Tech, I am firmly in the camp. Like, those are good football teams that toe-to-toe with anyone top-level competition-wise could win their conference, could be college football playoff teams that could win a game once they get there. I have firm belief in that. No trust. See, again, I was forced into categories I don't totally love here. No trust. Like, right now, these are bad categories. I love our producer. He did, not his fault. No trust. I'll say this. The teams that I still have questions about against the next level up of competition: Iowa State, Georgia Tech, Texas A&M, and Ole Miss. Hot mic user, Oklahoma, I'm not saying are frauds, but I am concerned going forward about a quarterback coming back from a hand surgery during the season. And a quarterback that is as important to that offense. Like, the John Mateer experience had been the driver for them offensively, both as a runner and a passer. And so I don't think they are fraudulent. I worry that with John Mateer's, their season's hope being pinned to John Mateer coming back from a hand surgery mid-season, that scares me in a way that makes me unable to trust them in the ways that I want to right now. I think this has been building for Brent Venables into this season, and I think if he comes back and is healthy, all bets are off. But right now, that is my worry, and that is my caveat with how this is set up. Trust-ish. All right, we're working on the fly here. Trust-ish, a much better way to put it there. Iowa State, Georgia Tech, Texas A&M, Ole Miss, exactly how I would describe them. Trust-ish for all these teams. Rocco Becht, awesome underrated college quarterback for Iowa State. They've already got good wins early in the season. And again, we saw this past weekend, right? Iowa's going to be a tough out for most everyone and challenge them. Iowa State's already got the wins there. Georgia Tech, it's just a question of whether or not Haynes King can survive the season. And I get the backup's already shown you some good stuff, but he's the engine on that offense. Good, well-coached team. I hope over the long run of the season, injury-wise, they can stay healthy. Texas A&M, I saw them up close and personal. The speed that they have portaled into that wide receiver room is incredible. Marcel Reed's a good quarterback. I am wondering if long-term he can be a good enough quarterback against better defenses than the one he saw certainly in South Bend a couple weeks ago, where it's young in the secondary. They were still kind of adjusting to a new coordinator. There were plenty of reasons why maybe that was going to be a bit easier time for him than it should have been, but offensive line-wise, running back-wise, defensively, the standard there under Mike Elko, the way they've reloaded along that front. And then Ole Miss, it's just a team that has been perennially kind of in this range, right, where they're going to look good during the regular season, but can this style of play that offensively ends up being, because of the pace and space stuff, boom or bust if you get to defenses that are a little more equipped in the trenches on the other side to handle this? That's sometimes where I can worry about these things. So, again, Oklahoma, I hear you fans in the chat. That Hawkins can still run, that you're in good hands there. I just think this is about the respect for John Mateer, who was a Heisman Trophy candidate and the leading candidate when he was healthy and on the field. And that's a lot of volatility around an important position. I want to be clear. Frauds question mark. I'm not saying you're frauds. I don't believe that. But of the teams I'm presented with here, I needed to fill out a third category, and you guys were the easy pick because there was an injury at quarterback right now, is sort of the reality of the situation. So there's a lot of there's a lot of good to very good teams in college football this year. I don't think there is a great team in the sport right now, and that's awesome because all the teams that we have on this list and a million more has a chance. Hot mic user, I'm with you. The Oklahoma defense alone last year had them in more games than most would think. That's that side of the ball. Like, Brent got that figured out last year, and there's no signs of slowing down. Legitimate war machine on that side of the football. I am not doubting you there. That's what's going to make this season a ton of fun, is because we have a bunch of very good to very good teams and not any great teams this year. That means a lot of people have a shot as we get closer, and depth and all of that are going to come into play, as it always will, now that we have a multi-team playoff, a 12-team playoff, and I'm sure going to be a 14 or 16-team playoff soon. So, as always, guys, we're here every Monday, 5 o'clock Eastern. We appreciate everyone in the chat being as active as they were, even those of you that were just here to try and fire James Franklin. I see you. I hear you. I understand your pain, even if I don't necessarily think it's that simple. There's not always greener grass on the other sides of these decisions, even though I know it's getting mighty uncomfortable in Happy Valley and some other places. But we'll be back this same time next week to take a look at the aftermath of what will surely be, because every weekend is in this sport, another incredibly chaotic weekend. Thanks so much. I'm Mike Golic Jr. We'll talk to you then.